I want to read a passage for you which really took place during the Holy Week, and it was Jesus trying to comfort his disciples, knowing that he would soon be leaving them. This comes to you from John 14, 1 through 6. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. But Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And in this passage, it mentions Jesus, and I think we all know who Jesus was, especially this time of Easter. We hear a lot of his story, and we appreciate all that he was and did for us and all he continues to be in our lives. But what about the other person mentioned in this passage, the disciple Thomas? How much do you know about him? Well, many people refer to Thomas as Thomas the Doubter. And why did they give him that title? Because Thomas consistently asked hard questions about Jesus and his ministry and what the plans were for the future. And he was a bit of a skeptic. And there was a time when Jesus found out that his friend Lazarus was sick. And Jesus said, let's go back to Judea and see Lazarus and his sisters. And Thomas remembered that not long ago when they were there, the Jewish leaders tried to kill Jesus. And so he was a little reluctant to go back, and he said, finally, we'll go with you, Jesus, so we can die with you. And that was kind of the sarcastic guy that Thomas was. And he would ask the hard questions and not be afraid to speak his mind. And then there was the famous time when, after Easter, maybe you heard this as a part of an Easter service this weekend, when Jesus rose from the grave, he appeared to the disciples and showed his hands and his feet and his side and proved that he was alive and that he was real. But who was the disciple who missed out? Thomas. For whatever reason, Thomas wasn't there. And so when the other disciples tried to tell him that Jesus was alive, he said, I will not believe it unless I see the nail marks in his hand, unless I put my fingers there, unless I touch his side where the spear pierced him. I won't believe. And so he was declared Thomas the Doubter. And finally, Jesus did come back a week later, and he said, Thomas, see my hands? Put your finger here. See my side? Stop doubting and believe. And of course, at that moment, Thomas believed completely. He said, my Lord and my God. And he devoted his life and never looked back fully to serving Jesus. And as tradition would tell us, church tradition, Thomas was the one who became a preacher and traveled throughout the world and ended up in India, planting churches that are there to this day. And he was martyred for his faith. He was killed with a spear, kind of like the spear that was thrust into Jesus' side. And so God transformed Thomas from a doubter to a believer. And he's doing the same in a lot of our hearts as well. And I hope he's working on each of our hearts today, even through this challenging time. Now, as I think about Barb and getting to know her the last 2 years, I've been a pastor here for about 2 years. We had some really great conversations. And part of the reason we talked was because Barb wasn't afraid to come in and tell me things that she wasn't happy about that I said or did in church. But I can tell you, I really appreciate it. She did it in a very grace-filled way, and she spoke her mind. And I've learned as a pastor through the years that if one person is thinking something, there's probably 10 other people thinking the same thing who don't have the courage to say what they're thinking. But she had the courage to say what she was thinking, and I appreciated that. And in a small town, in the culture we live in, sometimes if you're that person who's not afraid to say the hard things and ask the hard questions, sometimes you can rub other people the wrong way. Because in a small town, we tend to avoid conflict at all costs, right? And so if she was able to say the hard things, I imagine there were sometimes people didn't receive that well. But I think that Barb, like Thomas, was someone that God was transforming and was softening her heart and was taking that passion to speak the truth and using it in some positive ways. And I saw that the last couple of years. In one way, she was one of the rare people that you'll meet who never talked about retiring. She loved her job. She loved to work. And I would ask her about that, and she'd say, no, I don't even think about it. I love being busy. I love doing this work. And I love interacting with the young people that I see at all these sites where she would go. And she had a real passion. You know, most people you talk to can't wait till the day they can retire, but she loved to do that. She loved to be busy around the home and in the community. Daryl said it this way: she was a tough lady. You know, she spoke what her mind, as I said. And sometimes when she and I would talk, she would share stories of all of you and tell me how much she cared about all of you. And she would tell me things going on in your lives. And it was touching. I felt like I knew some of you, even though I hadn't met you, hearing her tell the stories. Now, I want to tell one story that, for me, I will always remember about Barb. And I'm sure some of you have heard part of this story as well, if not all of it. But early last winter, she had to go to Atlanta for training for her work. And she was there for 6 weeks. But before she left, one of her dogs had grown quite old and frail, and so she was concerned that he might not survive the 6 weeks. And so her friend Dave and neighbor, she got him all set up to take care of the dog while she was gone. But she also, being the practical lady that she was, dug a hole in the yard where he could be buried if he didn't survive. And sure enough, I would talk to Dave during that time. Dave was nervous because he didn't want the dog to die on his watch. But Barb had put her full confidence in him that he could take care of it. And sure enough, he began to fail the dog and stopped eating. And what was his name? I forget. Scamper, yeah. So Scamper was not doing well. And so Dave had to take him into the vet. And sure enough, Scamper just lay on the pickup truck seat. And as they approached the vet, he jumped up and started looking out the window and running around the cab of the pickup truck. And Dave wasn't sure. Maybe he still has some life in him. But after talking with Barb, after talking with the vet, they decided that because he wasn't eating, it was time to put him to sleep. But just thinking of Barb's perspective of all that going on while she was gone really made me appreciate both her caring side but also her practical side, in the way that she was good in both of those areas. Really came out in that simple story of a loved pet passing on. And then, of course, she didn't dwell on that for too long when she returned. It wasn't long before she got a new little puppy, and she started a new relationship with a pet. And so I appreciated that about her. We could tell many stories about Barb and her life, and that's part of the reason we're here today. But we're also here to grieve losing a loved one, and also to take stock of our own lives and remember how fragile and how short life can be, and to really take a look into our own hearts and allow God to search our souls and our hearts and show us ways that we can get back on the straight and narrow, if that's what's required, and follow him more closely. When Jesus spoke those words to Thomas and to the others, he knew that in just a matter of hours he would be leaving them. So he said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. In my Father's house are many rooms." Now, some of the older translations, you may be aware of this, translate that as many mansions. In my Father's house are many mansions. Some people learned it that way. And I want to say two things about that. First is that there's a temptation to imagine heaven as being all about us and our comfort and our enjoyment and our perfection. And certainly it has those things. But when we translate that as mansion, maybe we can get carried away with the thought that, in heaven I'll get to have everything I wish that I had on earth and all the enjoyment and pleasure I could ever imagine. Well, heaven will be a perfect place with no more crying, no more pain, no more death, no more tears, as God promised, but it will primarily be about being in that perfect relationship with God and entering into his glory, seeing him face to face. And I truly believe that when we are in his presence, the things of this world that we have desired will melt away. We won't worry about those things anymore. We won't be discouraged whether we have a huge mansion or not in heaven. We won't even think about that. So that's the first thing I would say. But the second thing I would say is this. When you are willing to submit your life to Jesus and to the Father, he's like any father. He wants to bless us as much as he can. And so, God being a loving Father, it wouldn't be surprise me at all if when we get to heaven, he pours out every blessing we could ever imagine and more as well. And the place where we live will be even greater than what we would even imagine as a mansion today. And so I would say both those things. Heaven will be all about God's glory, but it will also be a beautiful place, a place of freedom, a place of comfort, and a place where we can enjoy God and each other's presence forever. But we're not here to spend all our time imagining what heaven will be like. The most important thing that Jesus said to Thomas was, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He made that famous statement to Thomas, no one comes to the Father except through me. And so each one of us, as we search our hearts today, are we approaching the Father through faith in Jesus Christ? It's the question we need to be asking ourselves in a moment like this, so that we could have forgiveness for our sins, so that we could have a hope of heaven, and so that we could be in right relationship with God.